but I guess audio just stuck. And the other thing is I struggled with reading and writing when I grew up in high school. So having the ability to just get my hand on tech and learn it as I go, and I didn't have to read anything, like having that outlet, especially in high school, I think set me up for a win. Tech Sisters was me going, okay, we need a group of female identifying techs that reach out to each other and actually ask if you're okay, like not be on the defense side of like bitching about someone or tarnishing their reputation or whatever it may be, but just really empowering each other. And so the vision is exactly that: empowering, equipping, and encouraging. If you don't feel comfortable about raising this issue at the company, there are so many more companies to work for. You do not have to feel trapped at that one company. Just because that one company has really crap culture doesn't mean that you can have a flourishing experience at another. And there's so many great companies out there.
And welcome to the Theatre Art Life podcast. Today we're talking with Jess McCloughan. Jess is a seasoned RF engineer and mic-up tech with extensive experience in the corporate, concert and theatre industries. Some work colleagues describe her as a self-starting individual with a strong passion and knowledge of audio systems. With a bubbly personality and a client-focused mentality, she strives to ensure that the customer's expectation of an event is not only achieved but also exceeded. Throughout the last 13 years, she's been involved in many large-scale world-class events, one being the Commonwealth Games in the Gold Coast 2018, where she was contracted as an assistant production manager covering audio for the opening and closing ceremonies. Some other well-known events that she has helped to create include Sydney New Year's Eve, TEDx Sydney, IBM Think and School Spectacular, and School of Rock, both held at Sydney Qudos Bank Arena. Jess, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you on board. So I wanted to start with your path into entertainment and how did you get into the world of entertainment audio?
Yeah. So I started through youth group and then picked it up at school as well. I was fortunate enough to be able to have a decent amount of gear at my high school, so I was able to play on that in research and lunch. And then as I progressed, I worked in admin for a production company for 2 years out of high school and then went freelance. And I basically knew all the do's and don'ts because I had been in the office for so long and I'd heard all the complaining that when I went freelance, I was able to hit the ground running. And yeah, just went into AV.
And in the youth group, explain how you got it, like they were doing audio in youth group.
Yeah, so fortunately, back when I started, it was Hillsong, so they had a lot of kit. And so I was able to learn from Julius Grafton, who was also helping the kids at that point. And it was basically a live band with an analog console. I'm actually really happy I started on analog, started on the basics, and then worked my way through monitors. And then I think as I progressed, the mic up role became more and more present. And so then I just sat in that mic up role. From the youth group point, I got heaps of like mixing opportunities and exposure to that. And then I kind of found myself in the mic up RF world, which I am currently in and are loving. But yeah, so it was basically live bands, started on front of house, moved to monitors. But the exposure was heaps because you got Friday and then you got Sunday and then, you know, there'd be training through the week. So as much as I'm not in the church world anymore, I definitely benefited from that, from a confidence point of view and from a training point of view. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been out to the Hillsong stuff in Australia and Sydney, and they definitely have,
Kit.
facilities.
Yeah.
for people to use.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why audio and not lighting or other elements of the church services?
I don't know. I have no idea. I think I actually genuinely don't know. I mean, I've dabbled in lighting and video, so it's definitely not that I haven't tried, but I guess audio just stuck. And the other thing is I struggled with reading and writing when I grew up in high school. So having the ability to just get my hand on tech and learn it as I go, and I didn't have to read anything, like having that outlet, especially in high school, I think set me up for a win. a lot of kids who struggle with reading and writing lack confidence and esteem, and I was able to get that via the technology that I was able to access. So
this is something I could get my hands on where I don't have to read a textbook.
Exactly. But I actually have no idea why audio has stuck, but it has.
Yeah. Well, once a sound person, you generally stay in that lane, I feel.
Yeah. But I did give lighting and video a go from a project management point of view. So
yeah. So specifically, you specialize in RF and miking people up, and tell us. I guess there's, for those who are probably not audio savvy, like, how many roles are there in the audio realm, and then for you, why those two?
So basically, there's normally front of house monitors, system tech, maybe a sound designer if you're talking theatre. There's a handful of roles. For me, mic up and RF was exciting because everyone hated RF, and I actually really loved meeting new people and getting to know people's story. So the mic up element was really fun because I was able to talk to people and also create a kind of formula to make someone comfortable really, really fast. So by the time you're touching their waist, they're actually just telling you about how many kids they have. So it's quite a relaxing experience for them. And then the RF side, people were scared of it, and that intrigued me. So I just dove into it. And then a couple of years after I had really dived into RF, I actually found out my granddad was the comms guy for the Australian Army. So there's a little bit of a comms RF-y background in my history that I didn't actually realize until my nana passed away. As I never got to meet him because he died just before I was born. So yeah, it's more of a, like, now it's driven because I was like, if he was here, his mind would be blown by the stuff that we have just on a regular gig, let alone having to, hike it up in the forest or whatever he had to do in the Vietnam War. But yeah, I live victoriously through the fact that he would have his mind blown right now if he saw. And even like the fact that I own like 6 RF scanners and that are able to be flown with me. Like, he would have had these giant RF scanners and like all this kind of gear that's like so compact now. So
yeah. That's fascinating. I love that there's a family connection there.
Yeah.
I'm cognizant that maybe our listeners don't actually understand what RF is.
Oh, yes.
So could you just give a little bit of an explanation of what RF is and what that means in audio?
Yeah, totally. RF stands for radio frequencies, and it's basically the communication between the racks and the wireless mic, or the racks and the wireless IEMs. So anything wireless, whether it be a two-way radio as well, communicating with another two-way radio, they operate on frequencies, which basically the rack has a code to be able to only search for that one frequency, and sometimes and more advanced systems have like an encryption as well, so there's a double layer of security. But it basically is one channel of communication to another. As soon as they see each other, there's a form of audio that's transmitted. And then when you get to the point where you're doing 120 of those communications, they have to all be calculated and also accounted for with what's already in the environment, which is getting more and more fuller as we develop more technology. Fuller, I don't think that's a word, but I've just created it. But yeah, so it's basically, there's the element of one-to-one communication, and then there's the element of calculating lots of those one-to-ones to make sure they don't step on each other with the existing environment.
I remember stories from the audio guys when I lived in Vegas, because when the president came into town, he has a system that jumps frequencies regularly, so it's for security, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that would like end up getting hooked up into whatever's trying to get controlled in the theater, and havoc ensued. It's fascinating. People don't understand there's a lot of technicality behind getting that right,
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it's software. I'm not sitting there with a calculator. Although I have bought books so I could get to that point, because I'm a little nerdy like that. But yeah, a lot of it's software based, and scanners do all the hard work for you. But yeah, when interference hits, it's an interesting game. Which
Yeah. I always, it's very fascinating because I always find that Australians, whenever they do something, they want to know everything about it. It's generally like their MO.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that, and people that are really, really into all facets of what they do as an expert.
Yeah.
So I can see that in you. So I want to talk a little bit about like the freelance industry in Australia. A lot of the time we talk about work, say in America or the UK on this podcast, and how things work and what's fair and what's not fair. Tell us, is it easy to freelance in Australia? What's your way of getting work? How does that happen?
When I first started, because I had that admin side of a production company, I knew a lot of companies to start off with. So I knew a lot of brands. I had spoken to a lot of the freelancers because I'd paid them throughout the business that I was working with. So for me, it was actually quite easy to get into because I knew a lot of people before I even started necessarily, even though I was in admin. So I basically put a resume together and I sent it to a bunch of companies, made it very clear that I had no experience, so they didn't expect a lot, and it was just bump in and bump out at the beginning. And then I would send my availability out probably to start off with. I did every fortnight. Now I'm doing every 6 months, but just to get my name regularly in their email. I found that really helpful, that I was like, emailing every fortnight, especially when I was new, reminding them that I was still there. And then when I started, I had this giant Pelican, and I just threw every tool I ever owned, and I would take it to every gig, even though the gigs had some tools, and I would be known for that girl that had all of the tools with her. And so I'd literally drag this thing around, and it was annoying because I would park a million miles away, but I was always the person that brought my own tools, even though I didn't necessarily touch it all the time. Anytime someone asked me the tool, I said I would have it. And that really helped me when I started, because I was utilized in more than just my skills. I had a resource with me that would often save the day sometimes, especially when the toolkit may have been short a few items. So that really helped me. And then as I progressed, I got more and more companies. I worked out who I liked and who I didn't. Some cultures are great, some cultures are not. There's always heaps of companies in the pool. So I just would stop saying yes to some shifts and saying yes to other shifts, and then getting more and more advanced in my skills, asking people what books or resources they used. And I would always ask, the one key I tell people now, always ask what's next. Don't ever be stood standing around. Sometimes there is a lot of waiting, but I think the one key thing that helped me when I was starting freelance was I always was never seen standing around doing nothing. Either I was doing the less attractive jobs, or I was asking what was next. And I think that was really key, and always sending my availability every fortnight to remind people that I was still around. And yeah, the first couple of years were definitely bump in and bump out, so there was no operates. But I also wasn't obsessed with doing an operate, because I had that fulfillment in the church. Like I had a console that I was using, mixing, experimenting with. So a lot of engineers are obsessed with just getting in on the console, where I find a lot of things that have helped me now is the fact that I knew the fundamentals before I even got on a console for a corporate gig. But yeah, definitely asking what's next. I tell people that all the time, which you forget because you're just standing there expecting your boss to tell you what to do. And a lot of the times they're managing like 30 people. They're not just thinking about you. So yeah.
Yeah. A lot of proactivity there. I like that.
Yeah.
Approach. And how would you describe, has it shifted, Australia shifted post-pandemic? Has it changed? What's different in Australia after COVID?
Yeah, the one thing that's changed is we don't have a lot of crew. So I think at the moment it's a gold mine for freelancers, especially new ones, because people are trying to get more and more people on the books. And I also think that is going to help the culture, because now as a freelancer, you have a lot of choice, because companies need crew like never before. And so you can choose who have a good culture and who doesn't. But I think the biggest thing after the pandemic that I'm seeing is the amount of people that call me saying, Jess, do you know anyone who has experience in this or this or this? And 9 times out of 10, I say, yeah, I do, but they're all booked on major projects that they can't just step away from and do a small job. So yeah, crew is, and budgets, I think, are struggling as well.
Is there a lot of people coming into the industry? Are there a lot of new freelancers or no?
Not at the moment. I know NEP are doing a lot to the high schools to educate that they're there. Like as in the industry is available for them to come into, because a lot of people don't talk about us when we do career days, but it's very slow at the moment.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. I think that's globally too. It's really interesting to see that everybody's suffering the ramifications of everyone's like, screw it, I'll go get another job in the pandemic and I won't come back to the industry. So you have a Facebook group called Tech Sisters. So what was the impetus to start this group?
And now a note from our sponsor. The Theatre Out Live podcast is proud to be sponsored by ClearCom. ClearCom is the leader in voice communications for theatre and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of ClearCom Intercom solutions. You can find them at clearcom.com. Go check them out.
So you have a Facebook group called Tech Sisters. So what was the impetus to start this group?
So I was actually sexually assaulted in the industry. And one thing I found was no one asked if I was okay. They just talked about me behind my back and tarnished my reputation when I had a lot of anxiety. When it happened, the company dealt with it amazingly, like outstandingly. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome for the situation that was there. I got a full apology from the guy that did it. I honestly think it was a mistake as well. It was nipple cripple, so that was a thing back, I reckon, 10 years ago, where it was very prevalent amongst the guys, and he thought I was a guy, and I genuinely believe that is true because I am the only girl on site. He's not someone who has a hard approach to he's just not that character to hurt someone like that. And so the company dealt with it amazingly, and I was like, cool, I can just get back into it. And I went back into it, but I wasn't coping emotionally at all. This was like 2018. And the one thing I found, and not that I expect people just to, see how I'm going, but the one thing I found is when people would talk about my reputation, they would tarnish it because I wasn't coping. But no one said, we've known Jess for 7 years now. She's not lonely like this. Maybe something's different. And so Tech Sisters was me going, okay, we need a group of female identifying techs that reach out to each other and actually ask if you're okay. Like, not be on the defense side of like bitching about someone or tarnishing their reputation or whatever it may be, but just really empowering each other. And so the vision is exactly that: empowering, equipping, and encouraging. And I always say, if the comment doesn't or the post doesn't align with that, we won't post it or share it or encourage it. But I really just thought, after trying to encourage the industry to be more empowering and less like tearing down, I think that's always been the main vision of Tech Sisters. And it has been like there's been some challenging conversations in Tech Sisters. I mean, originally when I started, I was terrified with what people would bring up. And now I encourage it because I'm like, the more we talk about it, the more people are aware, the more education we can do around how to deal with these type of things. And after I was assaulted, I went straight back into the industry and I did a major project. And I actually went to the HR department and I said, hey, I'm not coping. This is not, I'm not coping, yada, yada, yada. This is not to do with this show, but I just am not coping. Do you have any resources? And I didn't actually link it to the assault at that point. I just thought I was having anxiety attacks. I don't know why I didn't link it to that, but I didn't realize trauma had such a massive effect on you. I didn't even know what trauma was, to be honest, until then. And for whatever reason, I don't really know whether narrative got changed, but the narrative was presented that I had gone to HR for a completely different reason to what I actually went to, and my reputation was tarnished. And I never really understood where the narrative completely changed, because I literally just went to them out of like, okay, I'm really struggling. But that really hurt my reputation in the industry. And so Tech Sisters was an outpouring of trying to encourage people to be more empowering and equipping of each other rather than tearing people down. Because if anyone who was part of hearing about that new narrative actually just took me aside and was like, Jess, this isn't actually like you. This new narrative does not fit your character or your personality. What's going on? I would have been like, I didn't say that at all. I actually just was trying to get help because I don't feel good right now. and it's nothing to do with this project. I just physically don't feel mentally okay. And so, yeah, that was that journey. And I've never actually talked about that on a podcast or in a post in Tech Sisters, but I'm glad it's here.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us, because it's one thing to have it happen to you, but another thing to be able to speak about it. And I think that's a lot of people's, especially women's, fear when it comes to situations like that, because of the potential ramifications of that.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
The funny thing is for me, and I don't live in Australia anymore, and I've been out of it for a long time. My big sort of like bird's eye view, there's such a weird juxtaposition between Australia having extremely strong women, just generally, right? Powerful, assertive, educated, smart women. And then a society that is still very masculine and man up and get over it and she'll be right, mate, kind of ethos. And that's not necessarily the man's fault. That's the culture that's blossomed in Australia. And I think, can you speak to that in a little bit, in a sense, perhaps, because I haven't been there for long? Is it still like that? And that's how I felt when I worked in the industry there. And I think maybe specifically in the entertainment industry, it's still very male dominated in certain sectors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I also think people don't understand what certain things can do and what comments can do. I recently had a very terrible comment said to me on 2 occasions. One, I was alone with a coworker when it happened, and I just don't think they comprehended the impact of those comments. Like, for me, I was like, what they were saying was true, but it was just so inappropriate. I felt really uncomfortable after. And it's that lack of actual education. Like, there's the point of like plain black, like, okay, nipple crippling a woman is just out. Like, no, there's no blurred lines about the impact that would have on someone. And then there's the sly comment about someone's appearance, or the sly, joke about, you would say it around the boys, and then sometimes you just forget it's a different impact for someone who's a female. And I think it's education. And before I was sexually assaulted, I had no idea what feeling violated felt like absolutely no concept. And when it hit, I was like, I literally said to myself, like, it was a mistake. He didn't mean to do it. Like, it's fine, Jess. Why do you feel so weird? And it was like this cloud in my brain, and I literally a smoke machine in my head. Like, that's all I could explain it. But like a comment or a misbehavior, or maybe like an accidental touch, like, those things can have detrimental effect to someone in terms of feeling violated or triggering an earlier memory. And I think it's just not understanding. And then obviously, because I've had trauma before, when I had that comment a couple of weeks ago, I could analyze the situation a lot more clearer, because I had counseling a lot and I had like resources to be able to step myself through that. But I think sometimes that can be reciprocated as, like, if I didn't have that education, I might be like, rah, like angry and unable to like comprehend my emotions and just end up being angry. And so then, women might look like angry people, but really they're just hurt and they don't know how to actually interpret their emotions, and they've been hurt really badly. It's not just hurt. It's like really, really traumatic issues in the industry that, guys or girls have done to them, and they haven't been able to regulate their emotions, and so they end up just looking like they're angry. And so there's no communication on, okay, your A action created the B response, and now we're seeing C. Like, other than just girls are angry, or girls, whatever it might end up collating to, I think there's just no education on, okay, you might make a mistake, but own it and learn from it and apologize and then move on. Or as in, like, the guys, like, instead of like dragging it through the dust and like talking to people about that person's response or whatever it is, like, okay, I screwed up. I obviously made A effect on, or B effect on this person, and it was really bad, and there might be repercussions with HR or whatever there may be, but learning from it and not dragging that gender through the like dirt. But I think people just don't understand the impact of these might look small comments on a person. I'm still feeling uncomfortable by the comment that was made a week or two ago. So yeah, and I think the element of, I mean, through my experience in like experiencing a lot of bad behavior, I would say about 10 evidently bad behaviors that have impacted me from other people. There's either the company that has great HR, they understand their culture, they understand the processes of dealing with this situation, and they've hired people that are able to regulate their emotions and whatever, and they've just nailed the hiring process. So then when you do say, hey, I've been treated this way, and then that person gets like pulled up for it or whatever, I think the breaking point is like, okay, cool, HR could deal with it amazingly, but if that person then tarnishes your reputation with the other crew or the other ops manager, then you've got this dilemma of, well, then I can't actually move forward in this company because I just raised something that. And so you have the companies that deal with it amazingly and understand the culture. And when I was sexually assaulted, my reputation never got tarnished because it was handled so well, so quickly, so efficiently. And I still work for that company today. And then you've got bigger corporations who, you know, really stamp that they're empowering women in the industry and, you know, they're all for it. But when you get to the nitty gritty, their culture has cracks in it to the point where even if someone wants to report an issue, there's internal toxicity and then reputations get tarnished. So I think if anything, the industry really needs to look at itself and go, okay, we can't really fix the industry as a whole. I don't think could be fixed for generations to come. But I do think that if you are a business owner or you do have influence over people, you can really encourage a safe working environment and dealing with those issues straight away, and not making it so much of like, okay, if someone screws up, their whole life is going to be messed up a lot. It's like, people make mistakes. If your intention was actually bad, then that's a whole nother conversation. But if you genuinely made a mistake, there is room to grow and there's room to improve. Like these topics can't be like death threatening. Like, you make a mistake and you genuinely didn't mean it, we can move forward. If you make a mistake and your intentions are bad, then okay, we need to have further conversations. But
that's another issue.
yeah. But I just think education on culture, and it's not even like, yeah, I think everyone gets along. Like, it's like, okay, that's one side of the culture. But are people bitching about each other? Are people tearing each other's reputation? When you say, okay, Lucy came on the job, how was she? Everyone's like, fuck, she was sick, blah, 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 sorry for swearing, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, then why? Why was she like that? Well, she didn't ask what to do next. Well, how long has she been in the industry for? Oh, 2 weeks. Okay, well, maybe we can give a bit of grace to that and take her on and show her all our online training and put her with some people who are really keen to train others, because those people will get the good out of that person. And then, like, just asking more questions then, oh, okay, they don't like that person, let's move on. Like, and I think in this day and age, we can't actually just dismiss someone because they piss someone off, because we don't have crew to do that for. But yeah, culture is more layers than everyone's just getting along, or, you know, the crew seem to work well together. There's so many layers to culture than just people getting along. And there's, you know, there's character matching, like, it goes on and on and on. I've read a lot of books on culture since being assaulted.
Well, one thing that's clear, you know, it's also not static, right? Like, you can't say, well, I've got the answers now, and it's an evolving thing. And I think a lot of people have made a lot of effort to, you know, be more aware, and, you know, step one is getting somebody in HR to deal with that. Whether they're dealing with it in the right way or not is the next step. And the thing, and it's really only just recently where all of this. You know, I was listening to a podcast just yesterday, I think, where they're just talking about, like, people actively talking about mental health is really only a recent phenomenon, right? Like, people didn't talk about it 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Where people, and so
physical
now
injuries were the only injuries we talk about. Yeah,
and we're sort of just trying to figure out our way. And you know, Australia still has a very high suicide rate in men. And so, you know, it's both sides of the coin that can be suffering by a lack of awareness, culture awareness, education,
absolutely,
proper management, and that's not even, I guess, you know, segregated to our industry. That's across the country and also the world. So I find it fascinating. I think it's a great direction. but in that direction, there's going to be hurdles and hiccups, right? Where
Absolutely.
people are
A journey.
going to be like, oh, you know, now we've got to all be woke. And and that's just like the most horribly used word, really, because what does that even mean? But it's interesting to think that, I just reflect on, it's kind of interesting that we're talking about it now because, on the back of Matilda's being one of the most watched TV sports in Australia. And I think there's a massive shift happening now where how beautiful was it to see men and women around the world celebrating women's sports, right? And so I'm
on the sidelines for most of that, and it's, oh man, I get teary because I'm like, how many generations of women have fought for this? How many generations of men have been like, nah, we need equal device between the two? Oh, man, it literally gets teary when they score. Like every time Matildas or any of the teams like have a passion moment, it's like, holy moly, we are literally seeing the fruits of people's labor, like who have fought for this for generations. Like,
yeah. For those who may not know the context and not following Australian World Cup, the World Cup soccer, the Matildas is the Australian soccer team, and the Australia had the most viewership on TV of a sporting event since Kathy Freeman won the 400 meter in the Olympics, right? Yeah. And that's beaten all of the Australian rules football or whatever, and it's just so beautiful to see a women's team being the focus of sport in Australia, because that's historically not been. I mean, when was the last time that anybody paid attention to the women's soccer on TV until this World Cup? And I just think super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you this question, but I think I already know the answer. Do you have a dream project?
Yeah. Oh, actually, yes, you do know the answer to this. I want to work for Taylor Swift and Pink as their RF tech. More so because they fly around the stadium, and that means more antennas, and that means more RF fun. People are like, you want to work for them because of girls? I'm like, well, they genuinely look like great people. Not that you'd probably ever meet them working for them, but you always want to work for someone that's spreading a good message. And I feel like those two artists are, and they have, it looks like genuine intentions, they genuinely care. So yeah, I would love to do RF for both of those artists at some point in my career. I have built my rack that I had envisioned a couple of years ago. So if I do ever get the call, I've got all my stuff ready to go.
That's awesome.
I literally was like, I just want this rack. I want to sort it out. It doesn't have mics in it. Everyone's like, oh, you want to buy mics? And I was like, no, I never want to buy all other stuff. But it's got scanners in it. It's got wave tool in it. It's ready to go. It's tour ready. I've got my drawers case. After 12 years of working in the industry, I finally got a drawers case. Maybe because my partner owns a warehouse and I actually have somewhere to store it.
Exactly.
Because I was like, I drive an I-30. I can't have a drawers case. Where am I going to put it? Or how can I transport it? So yeah, oh man. And people go, oh, that's a lovely dream. I'm like, no, it's actually possible. Well, for starters, all of Taylor Swift's technical team follow me on Instagram. So there's definitely connections already there. And yeah,
You've got to hit them up when they hit Australia, Jess. That's
the socials on RF Queens are going to go ballistic on the Friday night that we're going, because maybe I've got some tickets. And yeah, there's going to be beers for sure.
I love that the reason that you want to do it is not because, well, one, because of the star, but because they fly around the room and it's a complicated RF setup. That I did not know. I love that. I love that.
Both of them do that. And
yeah, because Pink's always going in she's doing all that aerial stuff.
All that harness,
yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, I do hope that becomes a reality.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I wanted to, we always finish our podcast with the two questions. So the first one is, what's your most favorite thing about the job or the industry?
Meeting new people. Absolutely. Meeting new people, hearing their stories, hearing where they've come from. Yeah. And I've mic'd CEOs who are billionaires, and I've mic'd someone who has gone through a traumatic experience and they're living on the other side and they're living their best self from going through that trauma, like absolute best self. And both those stories are both impactful. I remember when I mic'd the CEO of Shell, and my cousin actually works for Shell. So I was like, hey, my cousin works for Shell. And so that was really cool to be able to like connect with him. And my cousin's actually very high up in Shell. So that was quite awesome.
And if you could change one thing about the job, your job or the industry, what would that be?
People pausing before they tarnish someone's reputation. Just having a moment of constructive feedback. So obviously workers want to know if certain people are good at their job or not, and that's fair. But I think strategic replies in regard of, okay, they're really great at this, but they could work at this. I think those kind of replies to those situations can give people a much powerful chance to actually make it in the industry than to tarnish them. And I do want to say one thing about what I said before. If you don't feel comfortable about raising this issue at the company, there are so many more companies to work for. You do not have to feel trapped at that one company. Just because that one company has really crap culture doesn't mean that you can have a flourishing experience at another. And there's so many great companies out there. I've actually got a list on my phone with all the great culture companies. So when we do direct our members to a business, they need to have evidence of great culture, because we obviously don't want to filter our members through a company that hasn't, got a healthy environment, but we do want to encourage and empower companies that do. And I just want to tell people, if you do feel trapped and you've experienced something of that nature, and you've experienced someone tarnishing your reputation, like I just mentioned before, there is always another company that you can work for. And that's not covering up the issue. That's empowering another business that has nailed it. So that's what I would say to that.
I love that. I think that's great. And a business that gets that attention and gets that support and from the Tech Sisters, then hopefully then also grows in its reputation and business as well, because they're said there to advocate for all of its stuff,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Jess, thank you so much for being on the Theatre Art Life podcast. It's been such a joy to speak with you today, and thank you for sharing your stories and all of the things, the honesty about what you've been through. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Theatre Art Life is a global media site for entertainment. Memberships start at only $38 per year. You can have unlimited access to our daily published articles, including entertainment news and the writings of active industry professionals, ensuring that you are always up to date on the global happenings in the world of entertainment. Become a part of the international entertainment community and join us now at www.theatreartlife.com.